Stimming or self-stimulatory behaviour is something that many autistic people like myself do as a way of self-regulating. So, for example, in my case, I tend to stim when I'm anxious. It's usually subconscious. I'm not aware that I'm stimming, or certainly not at first. If I become aware that I'm stimming often in public, I will try and suppress it, which is never a good thing. And it takes several forms, and it's different for every person. So, for example, the most obvious one people would think of when it comes to stimming is when you see a child hand flapping or jumping up and down. In my own daughter's case, as a young child, she would often flap her hands and jump up and down when happy, not particularly when she was anxious. But again, it's different for everyone. She doesn't stim in that way so much now, but she does still stim, and it's usually with her hands. So it can be noticeable at times and quite discreet at other times. When she was younger, she would stim verbally, more so than she does now that she's older. As would I when I was a young child. My stims when I was a young child were often vocal and can only really be described as sort of grunting sounds. And I would also have physical stims, which were quite obvious and often quite complex. And as I grew older and became an adult, the vocal stims don't really happen often now, but I do stim regularly, subconsciously, and I become aware that I'm stimming after a while. If I'm in public, you quickly become aware that you're stimming if it's physical, because people start staring or looking at you and you immediately try to suppress it. A lot of the time I suppress stims, and it can take its toll sometimes because you shouldn't really try and suppress it. And if I'm at home and I can be myself, I stim quite happily, and it's usually physical. It's usually just with my hands, and it has a calming effect, a soothing effect, and I'm also a pacer, which is quite common. So when I'm at home, if I'm slightly anxious about something, it'll be a while before I realise I'm doing it, but I will actually pace around the entire house for some time, and that happens quite often, and it's been one that's been quite lifelong. The other stims I do have been quite long-lasting ones, which are usually with my hands, more discreet, and usually when I'm slightly anxious about something. But whatever form it takes, stimming for the autistic person, unless they're harming themselves or others, should never really be stopped. You should never try to stop an autistic person from stimming. When I'm stimming, people ask me what effect it has. How is it self-regulating? How is it soothing? What does it do for me? And in my own personal experience, because all autistic people are different, but how I experience it, the way it helps me, I can only liken, and it's not the best analogy, but I can only liken it to catnip for a cat. It has that instant soothing effect that nothing else has, and it's very hard to describe to somebody who isn't autistic, but that's how I see it. And it's something that you should never be ashamed of. You should never suppress, unless, as I've already said, you're causing harm to yourself. Then, stims are very natural, and they're our way of regulating our feelings, our emotions, our behaviour, and it's one of the better ways of doing so.